Our next presenter is Roger Staley. Roger is the CEO of Australia Africa Minerals Energy Group. Roger has 40 years of technical and management experience in exploration and the mining of a wide range of commodities. Roger began his career as a geologist with major companies in Australia and has since held global, regional, and country leadership positions with mining and mining service companies. His extensive experience includes projects in Australia, Zambia, Congo, Brazzaville, and Southeast Asia, in which he led or was part of exploration teams engaged in the discovery, definition, and evaluation of world-class mineral projects. As CEO of AMEG since 2022, Roger's role is to provide advocacy, insights, and connections for Australian resource and service companies operating across Africa. Please join me in welcoming Roger.
I've had a bad experience with this clicker before, so let's hope. Which one? Top one. Thanks very much for the introductions, and for those of you that have elected to stay on, I hope to reward you for that decision before heading out for an early lunch. I'm going to dwell on the lead slide for a bit. It talks a little bit about who we are, where we are, and what we are doing, which is really my three messages in my short presentation today. As AMEG, we're a membership organisation. As it says there, we help Australian companies prosper and do the right thing in Africa, in the resources sector. Of the 150 or thereabouts ASX-listed resource companies that hold tenements in Africa, about 90% of them are based in Perth, within about 2 or 3 kilometres of where you're sitting. So we're a long way from the country leadership in Canberra. So we, as West Australians do, we tend to clump together and look after each other. And it's an absolute privilege to be leader of this organisation. As you'll see right at the bottom there, we operate under the pillars of advocacy, insights and connections. And I wanted to zoom in a bit on the advocacy in my presentation today. A quick snapshot of Australians in Africa that I just mentioned. I showed a similar slide last year, but last year I did it all in. It was both the resource companies and the companies that service them. This year I've zoomed in on the resource companies, but you can take it for granted that there's about as many service companies supporting those resource companies operating in Africa. So between the 152 ASX-listed resource companies operating there, they have about 276 projects, of which we've heard quite a few in the last session. And as you'll note there, they're spread across 35 countries, and just the colour coding is there is a differential between those that are members of AMEG and those that aren't. Obviously, that's our work in progress. On the right-hand side there is the list of the top 10 destinations for Australian resource companies in Africa. And I'm particularly drawing your attention to South Africa. We often don't hear South Africa being presented in Africa Down Under because typically the mining is mature, the mines are enormous, so it's not really a hotbed of Australian junior exploration companies, but it is definitely a hotbed for major international firms that operate there. South 32, Anglo to mention a couple. And indeed one of the focuses in South Africa is coal, and we don't see a lot of coal exploration in Western Australia and hence not a lot of coal presence. It's very much an eastern state thing. That's my key message there. Hopefully you can read this, at least you can read the topic at the left-hand side there, but people or companies that sign up with AMEG, as I say, under the pillars of advocacy, insights and connections, why, I asked myself before I joined, why do they do that? And we run polls annually, and this is a summary of the last couple of polls, but basically if companies join us because they want to have a collaborative experience to be able to discuss and learn around country risk, around compliance for the jurisdictions within which they're operating, and of course ESG, which is probably increasing, is definitely increasing, But I think rather than look at AMEG to provide solutions, those member companies have contractors, they have their own people, as indeed we heard earlier today. So they're the three things that we get looked at, and if we can come up with some sort of collegiate forum on any of those topics or involve ourselves on the awareness of those, that's what we find ourselves doing on behalf of our members. Really the core of where I've been leading to so far is that who are our partners, who could support us, indeed who could support us more, and where are we? I've put the Australian government logo there because obviously they control policy, they control foreign policy, they control Treasury, they control all the Department of Foreign Affairs and Tourism. Some, or indeed many, are represented here today. But unfortunately, what we've seen, I'm mentioning down there Austrade, the department that promotes Australia overseas, if you like, that's Australia's marketing department at the bottom left there, Austrade. They've received something like a $40 million 40% funding drop over the last couple of years, in the order of $200 or $300 million reduction in funding. So I'm sort of calling out the Australian government with a strong sense of disappointment for not maintaining Australia's marketing presence offshore. And I've put in there on the map, you can see the red shaded parts is Canada's presence in Africa. In terms of trade, purely here, just looking at double tax agreements. I've not included bilateral investment treaties or anything else, but Canada does much, much more. They had trade commissioners scattered all across Africa. Australia has a much more modest presence, and indeed, sometimes when you have a conversation with an Australian foreign official or Australian official operating in a foreign area, they'll actually refer you to the Canadians and say, oh, we use the Canadians to do that, which sort of gets my goat a bit, really. Sorry for the Australianism there. So Canada is doing a lot more in Africa in terms of economic agreements. When I first started looking into this, I was, well, that's because of the Francophone connection. I put this map up to show you that a lot of those countries are not Francophone. So it is just the fact that Canada is really, really good at what it's doing in Africa. And indeed, I wish we could emulate that, because they are our principal competitors on the ground. They're a mining destination, and they've set themselves up economically for success. Back to Austrade, the funding cuts that they've received globally over the last couple of years have led to them being forced to make some tough decisions. And the most recent one was that they announced the forthcoming closure of their South African office in Johannesburg. That will be closed and shuttered on the 8th of December, the knock-on of which means that there will be no Australian government presence at the forthcoming mining Indaba in February, which is where all the mining companies that are interested, like yourselves, operating in Africa. There will be no Australian presence there other than those individuals or companies that wish to attend. That is a massive free kick to all the other players on the continent, and I find embarrassing. Unfortunately, we as AMEG only found out about it after the affair. We're actually meeting DFAT this afternoon to now talk about what this new reality looks like, and I hope we can, I can bury my feelings of disappointment and move forward to a solution and an implementation around it. But it is, if I could perhaps summarise the entire situation, where Canada is much better at this than us. We actually engage with Canada to do the job for us in Africa. They must be laughing at us. And so my perspective on this is that the Canadians are eating our lunch. For those that don't understand, that's a Vegemite sandwich. Okay, to close out, I'd like to put in a plug at this very lectern in this very room tomorrow night at about 6:30, 7 o'clock. AMEG hosts the annual Africa Awards, where we shine a light on the good things that Australian companies are doing, Australian resource companies and their service companies, and indeed their charities, supporting charities, are doing on the ground in and around the resource projects. This is what I like to call #BrandAustralia, where we demonstrate to the world that we're really good at mining, and we don't just come in and dig holes and make small rocks into smaller rocks and put them on boats. We leave behind a legacy. We train people, we educate people, we promote people. It is not tokenistic, it's real. And I'm very pleased that many of them make their way to Australia and become colleagues here on the ground as well. So they're the 4 categories we're having tomorrow night. Thank you to the judges, of which there's a couple in the room. It's been a bit of a slog, but we got there, and with a bit of luck, the trophies will be laser etched within the very near future, and we'll go live tomorrow night. Being a membership-based organisation, effectively a not-for-profit, we don't get anywhere without the support from a lot of people. Obviously, in this venue, all of us are here because of PayDirt's efforts to host this conference over the last 20-something years. But those companies there too, please, I draw your attention to their logo. All are huge players on the African continent. All are deeply involved with Africa, much, much beyond the point of business. Africa is part of their very fabric. So please support them, and because they support us way beyond what they have to do. Thank you.